Are we living in the Matrix? Are we living in nothing more than a computer simulation program? Are we even real ourselves? Or are we nothing but a program walking around in a simulated reality? This is what I'm going to talk about on this next episode of Peculiar Finds for Curious Minds, and I'm Jennifer Kennedy. Be sure to check out my website at peculiartalk.com, where you'll find my psychic services offered, like tarot readings and paranormal help, as well as all of the Peculiar Finds for Curious Minds podcast episodes. You can also find my podcast episodes on iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, YouTube, and Podomatic, so be sure to subscribe, follow, and like on all of my different platforms so you don't miss a single episode. Today I'm going to talk about the simulation theory. What is a simulation theory? It's not just the Matrix. Wikipedia defines it this way. The simulation hypothesis or simulation theory proposes that all of reality, including the Earth and the universe, is in fact an artificial simulation, most likely a computer simulation. So yes, we are talking about something like the Matrix, but not quite that crazy. This is actually a legitimate scientific hypothesis, and it's accepted by some top philosophers and scientists in the scientific field. It was invented by philosopher Nick Bostrom in 2003. He claims that there are likely three different possibilities when we're talking about civilizations and simulations. One of those possibilities is that civilization would reach extinction before it would ever reach full technological maturity. So the civilization would never even get to a point where it could create a simulation like that of the Matrix or something similar. The second possibility is that civilization would reach that full technological maturity where it could create what he called ancestor simulations. And these simulations would be so highly detailed that the people in them would be conscious, but that the civilizations creating these simulations would get bored with them and then just abandon them. Now, an ancestor simulation was basically a simulation of what our ancestors would do and would be like. Not necessarily, your grandma or your grandpa, but the ancestors to your human race or your place on the evolutionary scale. And the third possibility is that advanced civilizations would run computer ancestor simulations so sophisticated that we wouldn't even know we were in a computer program. That those simulated civilizations will become so technologically advanced that they could run their own simulations, which would create an infinite level of simulations nested within each other. So let's say that we are part of a simulation that some higher civilization created. We are becoming so technologically advanced that we could create a simulation where there are other beings, conscious beings, in that simulation. And we watch them advance. And then they could create their own simulation with conscious beings. And so on, infinitely. He's saying that these are three possibilities, and you can only have one of them. Either we become extinct, and we never achieve this, or we achieve it and we get bored with it, so it kind of ends there, or we achieve it and it just continues over and over and over. Another prominent person who believes that the simulation hypothesis or theory is possible is Neil deGrasse, a famous scientist. He suggests that the possibility of us being in a computer simulation is a 50-50 chance possibility. He points to the gap of intelligence between humans and chimpanzees, despite the 98% similarities in our DNA, as being a reason why he believes that we could possibly be in a simulation. Elon Musk is another prominent person who claims that it's a possibility that we are in a simulation. He claims that there's a 1 in a billion chance that we're living in a base reality, meaning an actual reality, not a simulation. He points out that within only 40 years, we have gone from Pong, where it's just a circle and two rectangles bouncing, the ball back and forth, the video game Pong. We've gone from that to hyper-realistic video games played by millions of people at once, online together, as well as virtual reality, within only 40 years. He says that it's not going to be very long before this gaming world technology and reality as we know it are indistinguishable. We won't be able to tell them apart. That we will be so immersed in it that we won't be able to tell if it's a game or real. Astrophysicist George Smoot, he's a Nobel Prize winner. He did a TED Talk on this, and he kind of rushes through it because it's just so much information to cram into a TED Talk. But he brings up some interesting points. Right now, we actually have the ability to download your DNA into a computer. He claims that within 30 years, we will be able to download our entire mind into a computer because we are already making advances in doing this. I didn't know we had come that far, but apparently we are already making advances in downloading our actual mind into a computer. And he claims that by the year 2045, we will be able to download our minds and our bodies into a computer. We kind of do this to an extent with mocap, motion capture. We're downloading our movements, our body shapes, our facial expressions via motion capture into a computer. That's how they make hyper-realistic video games. This concept has actually been teased in one of the episodes of the Netflix show Black Mirror, where a person dies and their mind is downloaded into a computer so that they can essentially live forever. He claims that humans can't accept this hypothesis because our brains just are not capable of accepting it or figuring it out. Our brains haven't come to that advanced level yet. And he proves this in the TED Talk with optical illusions. He shows optical illusions, and because our brains view them as optical illusions, like the optical illusion where there are a bunch of lines, and because of the way the lines are drawn, they look like they're curved when they're actually straight. Our brain is not capable of seeing the lines as being straight. It sees the optical illusion. And because our brains are not able to see through the optical illusions to where they're not optical illusions anymore, they're not capable of seeing and understanding the hypothesis of being in a simulation. Physicist James Gates also believes in the simulation theory. And the reason why he does, and this is pretty interesting, he found error-correcting codes in electrons and quarks when he was studying them. Error-correcting codes is what make web browsers work. It's self-organizing software. Why is code found in electrons and quarks? We shouldn't be finding actual code inside these electrons. In all of my research on this subject, that is by far the most astounding thing that could truly lead to the concept of us really being in a simulation. There are other philosophers that believe in the simulation theory or simulation hypothesis as well. One of them is David Chalmers. He says that the increasing bizarre happenings that we keep witnessing is the evidence that our universe is just someone else's simulation. He thinks that things are just too bizarre for it to be reality, so it's got to be a computer simulation. Scientists and philosophers also say that the simulation would be better than reality, because if we were living in a reality, it would just lead to human extinction. Whereas if we're living in a simulation, it allows for eternal life and resurrection, basically. If we are programs in a computer, then as long as there is a functioning computer, our programs can always be rerun. So scientists and philosophers say that it would be better if we actually were in a simulation than if we were living in reality. But living in a simulation raises the question of God. Is God the entity who's running the simulation? Any deity, not just God, but Brahman or the goddess in paganism, or, the pantheon of Greek gods. Are these gods the ones running the simulation? Is it more than one simulation? Some tech billionaires have even paid scientists to try to break us out of the simulation. But Nick Bostrom believes that this is a bad idea. He says the chances of success of breaking out of a simulation this advanced are negligible and a pure waste of money. He says even if it were successful, it would be a calamity, just complete destruction and chaos. So if we are living in a simulation, what are the reasons behind it? Why would it be a simulation? Why would anybody run a simulation this real? Well, there's several reasons why. To study what your ancestors did and how they lived. If you're an advanced civilization and you want to see how your past ancestors did things and progressed, it's a way of experiencing or seeing how history played out in a more realistic way than just reading it in books or trying to recreate it by your best guess in films. You program what you know about the human mind into a simulation and let it play out on its own. Another reason would be to study human behavior and science in order to solve current problems. Anthropologists, medical scientists, psychologists, and so on would be the primary kind of people who would do something like this. They would run the simulations in order to try and help them solve medical problems or solve mental health issues, or just for answers on why people do the things that they do and how they do the things that they do. Maybe someone would run a simulation in order to allow humanity to exist beyond a destroyed world. If we had the ability and we blew the world up or destroyed the environment so bad that it's impossible for humans to actually exist on the planet, and if we had the ability to download our brains into a computer, this would allow us to exist continuously rather than just dying off because we killed our world off. And that goes in hand with the theory of one of the possibilities being that humanity becomes extinct before it gets this technology. And it would do that, for example, by blowing the world up with a nuclear bomb. But if it had reached that point first, humanity might act more carelessly, knowing that, oh, we can tear this up, we can tear that up, we can blow this up, we can destroy our environment, because we have the ability to run simulations and live forever. So you got to kind of ask how that's going to play into ethics if you ever reach that point. But that's a reason that an advanced civilization would create a simulation to provide a way for humanity to exist after the world's been destroyed. Another reason would be to escape a crappy reality. If the world's not completely destroyed, but it's in such bad shape that you have to wear a breathing mask to go out into the environment, or let's say you're so advanced that you're suffering from depression and you just don't want to suffer from depression anymore, so you go into a simulated reality to escape a bad reality. We do that now. We go and we jump into video games and fantasy worlds to escape our everyday lives, to escape that stress just temporarily. So it's not out of the realm of possibility that we would do that to this extent of an actual simulated life. And of course, there's a reason of entertainment. What if some higher being is just creating a big video game, controlling us or controlling our environment and seeing what we do in it just for fun? Those are some of the reasons why any kind of civilization advanced enough to do it would create simulations. The simulation theory backs up a multiverse theory. Multiple simulations running at the same time to see which one works best would basically make us experience a multiverse. And there is a theory, and quantum physics have proven that multiverse is highly likely, that we are living in a time where there are multiple realities or multiple dimensions existing parallel to each other. With the simulation theory, what if these multiverses, these multiple realities or multiple dimensions, all parallel to each other, are nothing more than simulations? They're all just different simulations running at the same time. So that's one of the things that kind of backs up the simulation hypothesis. But another thing that backs it up is the fact that the universe is based on mathematical laws. And we're not talking about just basic mathematics. The whole universe, everything in existence, right down to the spacing of the planets between each other and the sun, everything in existence can be put down on paper into a mathematical formula of some sort. And it's so intricate and so precise that it is an amazingly beautiful thing. Mathematicians fall in love with it for this reason, because it's so crazy that something so precise could fit in such exact patterns that repeat themselves in a natural world where things are not supposed to be predictable. But if you look down to things like the spacing in between the planets, they're all in a specific mathematical pattern. The spacing with the moons had their distance from each planet. It's all a mathematical pattern. Time, it's a mathematical pattern. The way mass works is a mathematical pattern. The way electrons, atoms, everything. Even if you break the human body down, it's a symmetrical mathematical pattern. And scientists believe that this only could be possible in computer code, because the nature of computer code is mathematic. Have I got you questioning things yet? Well, there's even more. Get a load of this. In 2015, scientists at MIT discovered that they could send stimuli directly to a human brain using neurofibers. These fibers are no bigger than a strand of hair. They were designed to mimic the softness and flexibility of actual brain tissue. And because of this, it makes it possible to leave them as implants in place in the brain. Nowadays, we typically use needles, metallic fibers, and other stiff types of fibrous material. But these new neural fibers are breaking through technological advances. These fibers can deliver a combination of optical, electrical, and chemical signals back and forth to and from the brain. Not only would this allow us to learn more about the brain, but it would mean that we could now artificially enhance and manipulate the human brain. What does that mean? It means that eventually we will be able to use them to submit concepts, memories, and even more to our brains, essentially leading us to true conscious artificial intelligence, the merging of bio and AI into one. Right now, we only use it to transmit drugs to the brain. It's a fairly new capability. Again, it was discovered in 2015, but it breaks mad boundaries into the possibilities of a simulated existence. It gives us the possibility of a conscious artificial mind. It gives us the possibility of downloading a simulation to the brain, either the same or even similar simulation as what we download to another person's brain. And that could impact perception. The differences in each person's experience or perception could wind up not being perception at all. It could be just the difference in the simulation program that's downloaded to the brain. This isn't science fiction. This is something we've already discovered that we can do. We haven't perfected it yet, but in 2015 they discovered the means to be able to do this. And because they've discovered the means to do it, and because of our advances in computer programming and simulations, look at video games, this is going to be in our future. We will be able to, scientists have said for sure, we are going to be able to download our brains to computers and computer programs and information to our brains. It gives us the possibility of downloading info to our brain in an instant, such as how to fly a helicopter, like in the movie The Matrix. This is a real possibility. This is really going to happen because we have just discovered in 2015 the means to doing it. Now it's just a matter of discovering the process, discovering the programming. It even will give us the possibility of linking more than one brain together with these neurofibers. And this leads the way for a mass human simulated world without a giant computer system. It would just need one basic computer system. I mean, granted, advanced computer system, but one computer system to create the simulated program and to download that same program into everybody's brains by linking them with these neurofibers. Again, we've already just recently discovered the means to do this. We are on our way to actually having the ability. So if we are this advanced at this point, who's to say that some higher civilization hasn't already figured that out and that we are living that simulation, that those simulated programs haven't already been downloaded to our brains? We would have no way of knowing because it's too far advanced for our brains to grasp. It's really not so far-fetched, as science has already predicted that we will one day have hyper-realistic AI that can take on human thought, so to speak, and characteristics, like in the movie I, Robot. It's actually one of the end-of-the-world theories that AI would become so advanced that maybe even a combination of biomechanical races would become so advanced that it leads to the end of the world. To give you an idea of the possibilities of us actually being in a simulation, let's break it down in a ratio. Let's say one computer programmer creates a computer simulation of our world, a realistic computer simulation. Now you have our real world and then that computer simulation that exists. That means that people living in those two things, there's a 1 in 2 chance of those people living in a simulated world. Okay, well, let's say one person creates 3 different simulations of our world. They're all identical. Now you have 3 simulations and the real world, and all of them are identical. You can't tell them apart. They've been programmed that well. You have a 3 in 4 chance that you are living in one of the simulations. A 75% chance that you're living in one of the simulations. Here's another example to kind of make it a little more understandable. The video game Minecraft has sold over 100 million copies in our own world today. Let's say, what if in the future we have a higher civilization that has reached technological maturity? Let's say that someone in that future creates a simulation that's identical to our world, and that simulation becomes as popular as Minecraft. 100 million sold, or 100 million downloads, or whatever delivery method. Odds are 100 million to 1 that you're living in one of those simulations. That's a 99.999% chance that you're living in a simulated world. Extend that 100 million copies of that game over thousands of years of popularity. Let's say you've got someone, this highly advanced civilization, and they create an identical simulated world to our real world, or to their real world. And it sells 100 million copies. And those simulations, let's say it's a video game, they continue to play those simulations over thousands of years. Now your odds of being in a true base world reality are the same or actually even worse than the odds of winning the lottery. You are pretty much most likely living in a simulated world. That's not a what if that happens in the future. That's a what if it's already happened and we are a part of that simulated world. What if our brains have been downloaded and are experiencing these simulated worlds over and over and over? That is what happens beyond death. Now, there are different variations of this simulation hypothesis or simulation theory. One is that the world around us is the simulation, but we're still humans living in the simulation, much like The Matrix, the movie The Matrix. Another one is that we are biomechanical, part human, part computer, living in a simulated world. And here we go back to the simulation being downloaded to our brain, and we're living in a simulated world based on our brain's view. Or that we're biomechanical and our world is a simulation as well, and that our brain is interacting with that simulation. The program in our brain is interacting with the programmed world around us. Another variation is that we are 100% AI programmed. We are not biological whatsoever. And we are programmed to believe that we have consciousness, even though we don't. And we are simulated and living in a simulated world, just like a giant video game, like The Sims. And then a fourth variation of the theory is that we are in a self-organizing program. Now, what's a self-organizing program? It's software or a program that dynamically alters its internal structure to adapt and optimize its input stream. Okay, so that got a little technical. So what does that mean? In other words, the program recognizes itself when it needs to, and it adapts itself as needed. It updates. It would mean that the program does not have to rely on programmers to continue programming it. It would not have to rely on updates, on programmers having to program updates. It would not ever become outdated because the program is constantly updating itself. It would always repair itself, fix its code, change its code, evolve, adapt, all on its own. Sort of like the Vicky AI in the movie I, Robot. And we have this ability today. Again, go back to physicist James Gates. He found this self-organizing code in electrons, inside electrons and quarks. So this is not a what if we develop this technology. We already have this technology. So one of the variations of the simulation theory is that we are already living in a self-organizing program, in a self-organizing programmed simulation where it alters itself, where it stabilizes itself, where it keeps itself going infinitely without the need for any sort of maintenance. Now, of course, there are opponents to this theory, and they claim that the size of a computer that it would take to run a simulation this intense is impossible to build or run, that there's not enough energy to run it in the universe, and that there aren't enough atoms in the universe to even build such a computer. But what if we were in a simulation? We would not be advanced enough to even comprehend the computer system needed. The simulation might not have the proper sciences or mathematics built in for us to discover the simulation. And then, what if it's not even running on a giant computer? What if it's actually just a regular advanced program that's been downloaded to each individual's brain? Or that everybody's brains have been linked with these neural fibers, and it's been downloaded and spread to everybody's brain. You don't need a supercomputer. That's the arguments against it. There aren't many solid standing arguments from opponents of the theory. Naturally, we cannot comprehend the size and type of computer or the programming code that it would take to run a simulation like this, because we are not advanced enough to comprehend it. Our brains simply cannot comprehend it. We have not reached technological maturity. The only time anybody would be able to comprehend the simulation or the code behind it is if they were to reach technological maturity. If you've got an ant running around on the ground at an amusement park and somebody goes up and tells the ant, hey, this is how roller coasters work. We have roller coasters and we have the swings and carnival games and whatnot. You can tell the ant and he's still not going to understand because he's only got an ant brain. He's not technologically advanced. Well, in a simulated world, we are the ants. We are not at a level yet to comprehend. So to say that, oh, well, the size of the computer it would take to do this is impossible to build and run, maybe at our technological level, but we haven't reached technological maturity yet. A civilization that has most definitely would be able to. I mean, we can't even fathom or come up with any kind of ideas coming close to what that kind of technology would be like, because we have not advanced enough to fathom it. Now, all of this being said, this kind of raises some questions. If we are living in a simulated world, whether it's the world around us, or our brain is running a simulated program, or we're 100% simulated, everything is simulated, it raises some questions. What about sleep and dreams? Scientists have described sleep to be a process in which the brain goes through experiences and memories, kind of like going through a filing cabinet. It goes through each individual file or each individual experience or memory, getting rid of those that it doesn't need and filing the ones away that it does need in the proper order and place, just like a computer when it defrags. When you defrag your computer, it goes through every file on the system, on the drive, it gets rid of whatever it doesn't need, and it moves them in the proper place, in the proper order. Dreams are just the brain's process of doing this. Well, that sounds just like a computer. I mean, if we are a simulated world, what if that is what our brain is doing? It's going through the files of the program for that day or that week or that month or whatever, and it's cleaning up the fragmented code or the programmed experiences or memories, and it's filing them in the proper order. What if our brain is just defragging or debugging whenever we sleep? Like I said, getting rid of fragmented code or fixing any kind of bugs in the program. It would be a self-organizing program in our brain or simulated world. What if sleep works similar to the movie Avatar, where we enter the simulated world when we sleep in base reality, and then we go to sleep in the simulated world when we go back to base reality? What if we just can't remember base reality? What if the simulation wipes out our memory of the base reality whenever we enter the simulated world? What if that's just one of the side effects of going into a simulated world? Or it could be programmed to make you forget. I mean, are we doing this to ourselves? Or is somebody else doing it to us? Do they want to hide that we're in a simulation, or do they not care? What about the question of psychics and the paranormal? What if astral projection, remote viewing, and other psychic abilities is actually the ability to access the other programs or simulations? What if psychics are actually being able to access others' programmed simulation realities and see them? If they're able to see the past programmed simulation realities or the future ones? What if psychics are programmed to be able to do this? Why would they be programmed to be able to do this? What if it's just a spontaneous, self-organizing response that for some reason these particular simulated individuals spontaneously adapted to the program to be able to look at these other programs? It certainly would explain past lives. It could be one simulation program ending and then a new one starting. When a person actually has memories of their past lives, it could just be fragmented code left behind that never got cleaned up, that never got deleted out. What if ghosts and other entities are actually fragmented code left behind that hasn't been cleaned up? It happens all the time in actual coding, program coding of today. Bits and pieces are remaining that aren't truly functioning but are still visible in some way, whether it's in a video game and you see a spot on the screen that's a different color because of a fragmented piece of code, or just seeing the code itself. It's a fragment that just kind of hangs, but it doesn't do anything to impact the real world in a real way. Well, what if that's what a ghost is? It's just a fragmented piece of code of the person that program previously inhabited. What if it just left a little fragment of that program behind in the simulation, and now you have ghosts or any other entity? What if everybody's brain is connected, like with the neurofiber possibility, causing many individual simulations instead of one large one, and that those simulations are clashing, causing the paranormal activity? What if they're just not compatible completely, and it leaves this residual paranormal activity? It all kind of makes sense when you're looking at it from a simulation aspect. You can apply it to a simulation hypothesis. Or what about ancient civilizations? There are many instances of ancient civilizations becoming scientifically advanced for all intents and purposes, and then just disappearing or dying off rather than continuing to advance. The Mayans, the Sumerians, they were both highly advanced. There are other ancient civilizations that we just don't even know what happened to them. They just disappeared. We have many, many instances of bizarre findings in ancient archaeological records, such as finding watches and modern shoe prints in ancient times where shoes didn't exist. Batteries have been found, tools such as sledgehammers, and laser precise cut ancient building stones like Teotihuacan. We have all these bizarre things, and then these civilizations just disappear. Well, what if these civilizations were just simulations that died off, or they didn't work out as expected, or they experienced computer viruses, so to speak, or failed programming, or the entities behind the programs just abandoned them? What if that's what happened to these ancient civilizations? because you see all this ancient technology that kind of parallels our own technology, but in different ways. And then it just dies off. You know, the ancient Egyptians and the way they built pyramids, it's like they advanced and then it just kind of died back, and then we've rediscovered some of these technologies. You've got Sumerian tablets by the hundreds displaying the actual planetary system with the planets and the sun all in the proper places, proper positions, and scientific descriptions. And then it all just disappears, and then we rediscover it in the 1800s and 1900s and 2000s. What if it was a simulation and it was abandoned or died off, and then, we started the simulation all over again? That would explain time travel. It might not actually be time travel. It might just be the simulation, the programming, picking up and leaving off at different points. I mean, if you're in a simulation, you can move around in different times just depending on what your program does. If you discover if you are living in a simulation and you reach technological maturity and you're in a self-organizing program, what if that program hits the point where it's able to change and alter and pick up and leave off and put you in different points in time? Something to think about. A simulation would also explain a little bit of the Mandela effect. And I talked about the Mandela effect in episode 5. So let's delve into that a little bit. If we apply the Mandela effect to the simulation hypothesis, what if each brain has the simulation downloaded to it, yet there are different versions of it with these peculiar similarities that we find in the Mandela effect? Look at software today. It always has different versions due to upgrades or repairs and broken or missing code from the program's crashing. The filled-in code could be the Mandela variations, such as the Bernstein Bears, how it's spelled differently. What about bootleg or copied software? What if someone copied the original simulation program with just minor differences? Like today, you have video games that copy each other, but they have minor differences so that they don't violate copyright law. I mean, what if that's what caused the Mandela effect? What if it's the fact that it's a self-organizing program, where the simulation software and a certain group of people has adapted differently to some experiences than it did in another group of people? And maybe that's due to an unexpected programming glitch or some difference in the bio side of the brain that we haven't discovered yet or that we're not privy to yet. I mean, if you are dealing with a self-organizing program, it's not out of the realm of possibility that it could adapt differently in different people. What if this certain group of people that remember Mandela dying in prison in the 90s have some sort of predisposition that caused their self-organizing program to create that memory for them differently than the other memory of him dying in 2013? Now, a simulation theory really isn't too far from the realm of possibility. I mean, like I've said, we've already developed a lot of technologies that are doorways to doing this. Just look at video games today, and over the past decade, we have hundreds, if not thousands, of simulation games, like the Sims games. God, there's dozens of those just in and of themselves, where they are centered on just simulated people specifically. We have tons of civilization games that allow you to simulate civilizations of all time periods throughout known history and all races. You can get into a simulation game of pirates, of ancient Egypt. They have games where you can simulate where you're just basic little cavemen building huts or whatever. And then you can advance all the way up until modern times and even future times, what we would imagine future times to be. There are hundreds of these games on the market. So, I mean, we've already been doing this. It just hasn't reached the point of reality yet. Imagine advanced technology where we take this ability of creating all these simulated games, and then you add the ability to put an artificially conscious mind into these games, like virtual reality, which we already have. And we already just discovered the ability to create an artificially conscious mind by downloading programs to the mind in 2015. We just haven't gotten to the point. We know that that's how we can do it. We just haven't figured out how to do it. Imagine meshing all of those technologies together. We already know how to create a simulated world. We've practically perfected that. We just discovered how to create an artificially conscious mind. And we already have virtual reality. Combine those three and you have the perfectly simulated world. But what if we are in a simulated world where that's already happened? Again, you've got the simulation inside a simulation inside a simulation. So it's not really too far out of the realm of possibilities. And you look at video games today, they're getting more and more realistic looking. It's getting harder and harder to tell the difference when you look at some of the graphics of these games, of the game world. It's amazing. Look at Red Dead Redemption 2. Look at the upcoming Last of Us 2, the little bit we've seen in it, the facial expressions. It is getting to the point where it's very difficult to tell the difference between real and the graphics. We are only probably 20 years, if not less, away from them looking actually real. Look at what we do in movies now with CGI. So we are just on the edge of being able to do this. And the question is, why would we not do it? We are already combining immersion, virtual reality, and hyper-realistic graphics for a simulated experience. The difference is that we know it's simulated at this point. So looking at this sort of technology, a truly simulated world where we are not able to tell the difference is not very far off in the future. Most likely it will happen within less than 100 years when you look at the rapid pace that we are advancing in technology, maybe even less than 100. So it truly is not that far off, whether we create the simulated world ourselves or it might have already been done and we are in it right now. We might have already done it ourselves. We might have already destroyed our planet. We might have already decided to do it, and then here we are in the simulated world that either we created ourselves or that some other entity created themselves, and we're on the verge of doing it ourselves. And whether we're in a base reality or a simulated reality, we are on the precipice of obtaining the technology to do it. Does this make you say, oh, get out of here, there is no way, that is just a bunch of malarkey? Or does it look more and more like, hey, there might be something to this? Do you think it's possible? Comment on any of my social media. Comment on the Podomatic page. Comment on the YouTube page. Tell me what you think. Well, that's the end of this episode. I have not come up with a topic yet for next week. I'm dabbling in a couple different ideas, but it's probably going to have something to do with either UFOs or true crime. So be sure to check in next week, see what I'm talking about. I might give you an update through social media. Make sure you follow me on Twitter and Facebook. Be sure to go to the website, peculiartalk.com. Don't forget that I offer tarot readings and rune readings. I also offer psychic services for law enforcement, for the paranormal field. I offer crossing over. And don't forget to subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, YouTube, and Podomatic. That's my podcast home. That's who hosts my podcast. So be sure to check everything out and don't miss a single episode. And be sure to come back next week.